All right, I'm now going to be recording the rest of the section 4.1 for AP Statistics since we're behind, and then we can do an activity on Monday to kind of clean all of this up. We'll still be a day behind, but we'll be better than 2 or 3 days behind, which we are right now. I think it's only 2, but anyway, moving on. If you could pause right now and just make sure that your table of contents is filled out, clean that up. You can go into that. Once you're done doing that, you can move on. All right, we finished talking about a stratified random sample. I'm going to just leave this definition up here if you want a more concise definition for stratified random sample. Other than what I had on there, here's my typing. I was doing it by writing it with my finger, and it wasn't very clean. So if you want a better definition of stratified random sample, I'm going to just pause. Remember what I called? That was our Hunger Games example. Okay, again, I'll just pause. If you somehow missed today, we talked about our cluster sample. Again, I'll pause if you need to write down that definition. We talked about using the example with advisory teachers, doing an SRS of advisory teachers. We pull out 5 names and ask each student in the advisory the question. Again, pause if you need to write this down. Now what I'd like you to do is I would like you to write down this chart, okay? So pause it. I do not want you to write down yet what's in here. I'm going to talk about that specifically. So pretend almost like I had this filled in and that you couldn't see what it is. In fact, what I'll do maybe is just go like this so you can't see it. Now I know some of you might pause it, but I want you to do a chart, and so you're going to make a chart that's going to be, let's see, how many, 3 columns. By 4 rows. And in the first column, now I'm going to erase this red here because you can't see it, is the type of sampling method. Remember the goal here is we need to get data, and we need to get data the right way. So it's like our crock pot method where we stir it up. It needs to be random. That's very important. Let's talk about an SRS. What's an advantage of an SRS? The advantage of an SRS is it's relatively easy to execute. Each student or each individual has the same chance to be selected. A disadvantage kind of clean this up for you. Okay. A disadvantage would be that there's a chance that certain groups will be over or underrepresented just by chance. Remember, we talked about in the Hunger Games episode, or Hunger Games example, that there's a chance I could have pulled 2 boys out from the hat if all of our names were there. And they didn't want that for the Hunger Games. They want a girl and a boy. How did they ensure that? They did a stratified random sample. So that's the disadvantage of an SRS, is you may have every student's name in the bucket, but what if you get all seniors? You want to represent the entire school. The next is a stratified random sample. The disadvantage is there's no chance that a group will be over or underrepresented because of those hats. That takes care of it. A disadvantage, though, is it's just more complicated, more time-consuming, and can cost more money. A cluster sample is probably the most convenient, like when I talked about the advisors. It's easy to put 30 names in a hat, all the advisors in the homeroom, or excuse me, not homeroom, but advisory. It's not so easy to put 2,000 students' names in a hat and then pull names out that way. There is a chance, though, that certain groups will be underrepresented, just like in an SRS. With a cluster sample, I could pull out all advisors who have seniors. Pause it right now and make sure you have this filled out in your notes. Thank you. Sampling and non-sampling errors. Put that as your heading. Pause it, and when you're ready, I'll start talking about inference. When I say the word inference in statistics, I'm talking about drawing conclusions. And the best way to do this is to use random samples to attack this bias. Now, how do I control bias still, even if I'm using a random sample? We have something called a margin of error. Please write the definition down. It means random samples come with a margin of error to account for those natural chance errors. I am going to do an activity on Monday that's really going to highlight the understanding for this. So I'm not going to talk too long about it right now. Sampling errors come, this is the big one, and I don't know if we have this definition down. Sampling errors come from the act of taking the sample. Under coverage, you should have in your notes already, that's part of a sampling error. The groups or the populations are left out. Voluntary response convenience samples, those lead to sampling errors. And again, we've talked about this. If you have any questions, make sure you note that so you can ask in class on Monday. I am not doing notes on Monday. On Monday, we're going to do an activity, and it's going to be a work day, and I will have things for you to do on that. But it will be our time to work and just get everything cleaned up, questions answered. You're watching the video, so I can have that time with you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have that. An AP exam tip, make sure you stop and pause this and write this down. I will explain it though here first. Don't use the wrong terminology. For example, if I start talking about a voluntary response sample, and then I start talking about, well, it's when the person goes to the mall and asks questions. Well, that's actually a convenience sample. If you forget the terminology, just do a really good job clearly describing what's going on, the error in context. And then make sure, again, you speculate which direction the bias is. A non-sampling error comes from the act of what happens after the sample is given. So you could write your sample or your survey, or however you're going to gather your data. And the non-response, remember, is the liars. And then the response is when they answer wrong. I just messed up, excuse me. The non-response bias is when people either can't be reached or they don't want to do it. Response bias is the liars. Remember, if I would ask a survey to a bunch of high schoolers about their alcohol and drug use, many of them are going to lie. A, alcohol and drugs are not good for your body. B, you're underage and it's illegal. Leave some space for this women, love, and non-response cutout. I am going to talk about that on Monday. Let's talk about example 9 right now. I'll give you room, or leave some room for this as well, so you can glue this in if you'd like. How do Americans feel about healthcare reform? During the middle of the drive to pass healthcare reform legislation in July of 2010, several different polling organizations attempted to measure the sentiments of Americans. A New York Times CBS poll found that 66% supported government-administered health insurance plan, something like the Medicare coverage that people 65 and older get. However, a Fox News poll found that 44% supported a government-run health insurance plan. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Take a minute, pause, and think about this. Hopefully you noticed the wording of the question. We'll talk more about this when I hand the handout out on Monday, but wording of the question is huge. It's the most important influence on the answers given to a sample survey. Confusing or leading questions can introduce strong bias. The best example I have for you is if you've ever come home late and your mom and dad said, "Jerry, you're late. You were out making bad choices, weren't you?" This is a leading question. Oh, well, you kind of get frazzled. Sometimes they lead you to answer a certain way. Poorly worded questions are very, very vital. You do not want them. Let me back up. Poorly worded questions really can influence the way a survey goes. So you want them written the right way so we get accurate results that represent the population. And then finally, I would just want to make sure that you understand the difference between the population and a sample in the following. The student government in a high school surveys 100 of the students at the school to get their opinions about a change to the bell schedule. You will be asked to identify the difference between a population and a sample. Let me give you, for instance, for part A, my best way to help you with this would say, do the sample first. The sample always has a number attached from it, okay? I took a small bite of cookie, okay? I had half a piece of pizza, okay? And then you draw a conclusion about the whole thing. I took a small bite of cookie. The whole cookie is so good. You generalize about the entire cookie. You don't say the bite is good. You usually generalize, wow, that cookie is good. So the sample in part A is the 100 high school students. Okay, the population then would be all high school students at that place, okay? Part B, the quality control manager of a bottling company selects 10 cans from the production line to make sure its volume of sold is within acceptable limits. The 10 is the sample, the 10 cans, the population is all of the cans. Again, just covering up that number 10. So 10 cans is my sample. Cover it up and put all cans, and that's my population. Please write down any questions you have about what I talked about. On Monday, we're going to do an activity, and we're going to talk about some of these example problems in depth a little bit more. I'll give you those cutouts. But it will mostly be a work day while that activity is going on, because the activity is really individual. I'm going to walk around talking to each person. So make sure that you bring your book on Monday and that you get your answer the Schoology quiz over the weekend, please. Thank you.